So one of the last topics we're going to talk about is price discrimination for monopolists. So up until now, we kind of been assuming that monopolists could only charge one price to everybody. And that's why we had that kind of marginal revenue curve that was steeper than the demand curve. That in order to sell more units, the monopolists had to lower their price on all of them. But now we're going to assume that maybe they can charge different people different prices. Discrimination. So price discrimination. And so, instead of just being able to sell all their units to everybody at one single price, maybe the monopolist can charge different prices to different people. So selling the same product or service at different prices to different groups, to different buyers, maybe, I should say, to different buyers. So they're selling the same product at different prices to different buyers. Now what they want to do is they want to discriminate along willingness to pay. So the discrimination here is talking about discriminating against willingness to pay. Discriminate along willingness to pay. So remember, willingness to pay is like a different way of thinking about that demand curve, right? And so they want to charge people that have high willingness to pay. They want to charge them more than someone who has lower willingness to pay. Now, one of the issues is they cannot observe willingness to pay directly. So instead, they might look at characteristics of people and try to charge people with different characteristics different amounts. So maybe they try to find things that are correlated with willingness to pay or ability to pay. So think about, they don't actually observe willingness to pay, but some companies will charge different prices to like students and seniors than kind of the adult price, right? And their idea is that kind of seniors and students might have a lower willingness to pay because they have lower income, whereas adults might have a higher willingness to pay because maybe their income is higher. So that's kind of their way of trying to find willingness to pay is through age, for instance. So the first thing we should talk about is when these firms can price discriminate, and then we can talk about two different methods that they might use to be able to discriminate. One's going to be across different units of output, and one's going to be across different market segments. So when can monopolists price discriminate? They need three things to be true. They need to have market power. Maybe I should just say when firms in general can do this. So have market powers. Well, monopolists have market powers. They have an ability to set the price. So that's no problem here. Consumers have a different valuations of the product. So different willingness to pay. So we need the consumers to have different willingnesses to pay in order for us to discriminate along this willingness to pay margin, right? I mean, that kind of makes sense. And the third one is no arbitrage. So arbitrage is basically, saying you have no ability. Arbitrage is saying that someone doesn't have the ability to buy at a lower price and then resell that item to other people. So for instance, let's go back to this example. Let's say the movies. And the movies charge different prices for students and seniors versus adults. So they're price discriminating. Or let's say Via Rail in terms of their trains. You can get student prices versus, and they're noticeably cheaper than adult prices. No arbitrage is basically saying that you couldn't buy a student ticket for cheaper and then sell it to an adult to use. Like you couldn't buy this cheaper Via or train ticket with a student price and your student card and then sell it to me. Like they stop that by checking student IDs, when they do check them. But that's a key thing to be able to price discriminate, is stopping this reselling of items that are purchased for lower prices to people that have higher willingness to pay. So let's think about a couple different ways that monopolists could price discriminate. So 2 options that we're going to explore, though we'll talk about hurdling maybe at the end as well. 2 options for price discrimination. The first option we're going to look at is along units of output. And the second is going to be in market segments. So let's talk about what A looks like. And so this is the idea that you charge different prices for different amounts of units you sell. So for instance, in this, for A, I'll just put a little A on the bottom so we know we're talking about A here. We have price and quantity. Put a line down here. Price and quantity, we have this downward sloping demand curve. We have the marginal revenue curve, which is steeper. We have this upward sloping marginal cost curve. And let's say we have an ATC that looks something like that, where it goes through the minimum point. Okay, so we know profit maximizing quantities where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So this is how much a normal monopolist, a single price monopolist, would produce, and they charge this price. Now their profits would be this area here. Now let's say, they have the ability to charge different amounts for different quantities. So the first little, let's get a different color so it would show up better. The first, let's say, Q1 units, we'll do another one for Q2. The first Q1 units, let's say they could actually sell at a higher price. So all of a sudden they could identify the people that have really high willingness to pay, and they sell the first number of units to them and they charge a higher price for it. Or you can think about the same consumer buying multiple items. So they can keep track of how much they buy, and the first few you buy are really expensive, but as you buy, the first Q1 number of units you buy, you have to pay this price up here. But then all of a sudden you buy the next little unit and it's going to cost you less. You can charge just P2 for the next blank units, and then we just charge, this PM for the rest of them. We could think of there being even more of these, more of the discrimination along this units of output. So there could be, Q3 and Q4 and so on and so forth. But what this is doing is it's increasing the profit of the firms. If they can sell the first Q1 units for this P1, they're going to increase their profit by that amount. And then they're also going to increase their profit on this, these units they sell between Q1 and Q2. If they can charge a higher amount for that many units, they're going to increase their profit by this much. And so if the blue is the normal profit of a single price monopolist, price discriminating along units of output is going to kind of add to this profit. Notice there's still some consumer surplus here, but it's taking away some of this consumer surplus and putting it in the hands of firms. And so the firms are getting this extra profit from discriminating along the units of output by charging a higher price for the first Q1 or Q2 units of output. We're just kind of assuming that it stops at, they charge everyone the same amount at QM, anything more than Q2, I guess. But you could think of even more kind of these steps going down. So that's how price discrimination would work along units of output. So notice here, if they increase if they produce more and they discriminate and get even more Q, if they sold more Q, then our deadweight loss would go down. So it could be efficient for firms to price discriminate if they end up selling more units. Now we can think of B, which is going to be segmenting markets. And so the idea with segmenting markets is you can segment by age. So let's do B over here. I know I'm putting A and B there. You can segment by age. You could segment by region. So geographically, they could charge different, geographic regions different amounts as long as they can't arbitrage between these two regions. And the idea here is that you're going to charge the more inelastic or the less elastic market segment more. So let's think about age. You segment by age and you have adults versus students or something like that. So maybe the market for students are more sensitive to price. And so they have a relatively flat demand curve, and here's their marginal revenue curve. And then maybe we think we have the same product but for adults. We have a price and a quantity, and they're less sensitive maybe to price. So they have a steeper demand curve and a steeper marginal revenue curve. Now if we draw our marginal cost curve for each of them, marginal revenue equals marginal cost is going to be where we produce. I guess we can draw ATCs as well. Again, should be going through that minimum point, hopefully somewhat close. This is how much they should produce for students. This is how much they'll charge students. Maybe I'll put S for student quantity and student price. Figure out the profit in the student market would be this orange area here. And we could do the exact same thing in this adult market. And we're going to notice that the price that they're going to charge in this adult market is going to be significantly higher because people are less sensitive to price because we have these steeper, more inelastic demand curves. Marginal revenue equals marginal price. This is the Q for adults. We go up to their price. See the price is a lot higher. And this is their profit here. So that's profit for the adult market, and this is our segment of that market. This is for the student segment, be the profit there. And so these are two different ways that you could price discriminate. Another way is hurdling. And this is the idea that, maybe you charge different amounts based on things like time. So books come out in hardcover first, and they're more expensive, and people who really want to buy this book and read it really quickly are going to pay these hardcover prices. Those who are less willing to pay these high prices for hardcover books might wait, and they might wait for paperback books to come out and just buy the paperback version. Another example of hurdling is, you're making people jump through something, or hurdle something, I should say. Jump over something is probably a better way to put it. So making people jump over, waiting, for instance. Or you're making people, let's say, fill in a rebate form or bring coupons to the grocery store to get cheaper groceries. So you're making people do something. Only people with low willingness to pay or lower willingness to pay are going to jump over that hurdle. Where people with high willingness to pay might not care about kind of filling in that rebate form or looking through the weekly magazine or whatever, or the weekly flyer, I should say, to get these coupons for a grocery store. They're not willing to do that. And so these firms, monopolists, are trying to price discriminate, or firms in general trying to price discriminate by just making people jump over these hurdles. But anyway, so two different ways of discriminating are going to be market segments, so dividing the market into different segments and charging these different segments different amounts, or by charging different amounts based on output. So the first whatever Q1 units, they charge P1, the next amount of units between Q2 and Q1, they're going to charge a different price, and then they could have lots of different prices there. So price discrimination, we see this a lot in the real world. So it's a really important concept to kind of understand and kind of see that it's happening in the real world when you see these different prices for different groups and things like that.